greatest in the kingdom of heaven. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Today we heard from one of the more exciting stories from the life of the prophet Elijah. It's always kind of special to me when I first entered the seminary and I started praying the breviary. I remember the first time I did the office of readings, it was the story of Elijah at Mount Carmel. And so it's always kind of special. But it's also a very exciting story. It seems like, the life of Elijah is something that a movie could be made out of the life of Elijah. There's so many amazing stories and miracles that he performs. Something that we should all remember when we're reading about these stories of Elijah is, one of the common things that people think today is that all throughout the Old Testament and in the Bible days, right, there were always miracles being performed, and then we're kind of the exception today. Right? It's a mistaken understanding for two reasons, because first of all, there are still many miracles that still take place today, and it's just not always publicized. But also throughout the scriptures, not everybody was a miracle worker. Most of the prophets listed in the Bible are not known for miracles. They're known simply for their preaching and their prophecies. Elijah is kind of like an exception, along with Moses and Joshua and David of the Old Testament, people who could perform great miracles. And the story that happens today is he confronts the prophets of Baal. Right? So in the context of this story, right, most of Elijah's life is spent at odds with the king Ahab. Again, as I said a couple of days ago, this is after Israel had split into the northern and southern kingdoms, shortly after the time of King David. So Ahab is the king of Israel in the north. So the people of Israel in the north have already committed a great sacrilege by abandoning the temple in Jerusalem, which was rightly established, and establishing their own temples in the north. So from the beginning, they had already been corrupted. And as their story goes, they got more and more corrupt. Ahab perhaps maybe had good intentions as a young man, but became corrupted because of a series of compromises he had made in his moral life. He married a Gentile Phoenician woman who proved to be a very corrupt and evil bride. She introduced the worship of Baal and many other pagan gods in the nation of Israel. And so he was gradually corrupted. And she convinced him to commit murder and theft and lots of other terrible things. But Ahab was just an example of many of the people living in Israel in those days. It wasn't that they completely abandoned faith in the God of Israel. It was that they kept letting other gods squeeze in. And over time, they basically replaced God of Israel as the priority. And so we see this gradual corruption of the people of Israel. And so finally, Elijah had had enough. And he asked the people to take a stand. How long will you straddle the issue, Elijah said. If the Lord is God, then follow him. If Baal, then follow him. Challenging the people to make a decision to rid themselves of the false gods and place their hopes entirely in the God of Israel. And as we read this epic story, right, Elijah basically was taunting the prophets of Baal. There were 450 prophets of Baal and only one prophet of Israel. And he began to taunt them and challenge them. Baal, right, when Elijah challenged them, basically what he said was, we'll set up two different altars, and whoever's sacrifice is burned up in fire, right, that will be the one true God. And again, this was a mockery of the prophets of Baal, because Baal was known as the god of fire and the god of lightning, basically the god of the storms and the clouds. And so this was like his area of expertise, you might say. Not only that, but Elijah challenged them to do this on Mount Carmel, which kind of interestingly, in terms of geography, Mount Carmel is right in between the land of Israel and the land of Phoenicia. So basically, like even geographically, right, it was a showdown, right, between the two lands and the two gods. And Elijah further mocked them when their sacrifice was not burned up in fire. Elijah asked them that maybe their god of Baal had gone outside to relieve himself. And then sure enough, when they didn't have any of their sacrifices burned up in fire, Elijah's sacrifice, not only did he put the sacrifice on the altar, but he had them pour water on it 3 times, just to make it absolutely clear this would be a miraculous occurrence. And sure enough, Elijah was victorious. The people, after this took place, they went down and they actually gave capital punishment to those 450 prophets of Baal, which of course when we read that story it seems pretty harsh. But as the church fathers always said about these stories of the Old Testament, it's important that you read them in a spiritual way. It's not that we should go about, murdering pagans, right, or anything like that. But it's that anything that has crept into our spiritual life, anything that has crept into our soul, anything that has corrupted us, we should rid ourselves and choose for the Lord. So the question for us today is, what are those false gods? What are the things in which we have placed our hope? How have we been committing spiritual adultery, right, in the language of the Old Testament prophets? And what things have we been placing our hope? And what things do we need to rid ourselves of and return to faith in God alone?